Good morning. How's it going? Today we're going to wrap our series through 4 aspects of love. We've been talking about 4 aspects of love, and I would argue there are many aspects of love. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13, he defined love as selfless and not self-seeking and patient and kind as he goes through a list. And I think that John, the Apostle John, would agree with that list, and it's a manifestation, if you will. It explains a heart that's been transformed. So John, in his letter, someone who's been transformed from a son of thunder to an apostle of love, someone who's compassionate. He says that when you've been transformed by the true love of God, you can't help but be called to love others like you've been loved. It's in you. Like it's going to move you and motivate you to love like that. And that love is distinct. It's different than the world and its love and what we've experienced. It's not selfish. It's not transactional. It's transformational. It delivers. Like we talked about last week, it was all hinging on how God would take what was bitter and broken, send His Son, and make it sweet and give us abundant life because of what He did on a tree. And because of that, it's going to manifest itself in a number of ways. But today, John specifically decides to focus on 2. He focuses intentionally on 2 ways that love is manifest and displayed by his people. And that's in generosity and hospitality. In fact, it's such a big deal for him that he's going to pick a fight about it. In 3 John 1, he's going to contend. He's going to pick a fight. And he's going to take 2 examples of leaders in the church at Ephesus at that time. And he's going to highlight one, and he's going to commend them, and then he's going to condemn the other. And I'm going to tell you that their names are a little different. He's going to commend Gaius, but then he's going to condemn or rebuke Diotrephes. And that's a really hard name to say, so if at some point I mess that up today, I'm highly likely to do that. I may just start calling him Big D, okay? Because Diotrephes is just not natural. I'm not used to that name. But he says, this is a life that you do not need to emulate. Yet this one is. And so he's going to pick a fight and he's going to contend. Can I ask you something before we jump into this letter? Because it's really important to me. I think it's good. How many of you know that God created you in His image before the foundation of the world, knew you even when you were in your mother's womb? Knew you before that time. Okay? So when I say that He was a son of thunder, that meant that he had a boldness that was in him. And in his old life, he only knew to fight for himself, to fight for self-respect, to demand it of other people. He was thin-skinned and he was quick to offense. But when you have that person all of a sudden have their life transformed by Jesus, it doesn't mean the boldness goes away. It just means the boldness has purpose. Hello? It means that now I have a fight worth fighting. Now I have a fight worth fighting for. Not for myself, but for the truth, the thing that changed me, hope. And so the Son of Thunder writes these letters in the New Testament as the apostle of love, known as the one who's compassionate, but willing to pick the fights he needed to and willing to contend for the faith because it changed everything. Hello? So when Romans 8 says that God will use all things for the glory of those who are called according to His purposes, I'm going to tell you there's some stuff that was put in you before you even knew Jesus by God Himself. And when those gifts were put in you, even back then before you knew Him, you only knew to use them for yourself, and you become the worst picture of yourself. But when your life is transformed by His heart, all of a sudden, the things that were put in you start to make sense, and they feel purposeful. And so in 3 John, he's commending his friend Gaius as he writes him a letter for being just that. 3 John 1, 2 through 8, he says, "Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, and all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified of your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for brothers and sisters, even though they're strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such people so that the work so that we may work together for the truth. So before we go any further, those last two verses, 7 and 8, what he's saying is those who went out in the name of Jesus, who went in ministry for the name of the one who offers hope and the only one that offers hope. He says, you've been willing to house people and be hospitable with those who are complete strangers to you, but they were true brothers. And this is how you've joined God in this ministry, and that is good. That there's a gospel ministry that they carry with them, and they're offering hope to a world that needs that hope. And along the road, when you journeyed in this day, it was difficult. It was very hard. And in fact, in Luke 10, Jesus gives an example that we're going to look at in a moment, but it explains life on the road in those days. And how I think that many of us here living in this city specifically understand that life on the road is hard. But in their day, you would travel, walk, oftentimes run the risk of being beaten, robbed, and left for dead. John's highlighting that a byproduct of a life changed by Jesus will be generous, specifically manifest in the form of hospitality. And so for those that are walking these roads to advance the gospel to all ends because their lives have been transformed, he commends Gaius for housing them when they travel and come to Ephesus. Because he goes, my life was transformed. I was changed from son of thunder to apostle of love. Obviously, Gaius, your life was changed. Otherwise, you wouldn't do that because they're getting no help from people who are pagans. I'm going to talk about one of those in a moment. But their life offers hope, and they believe in this. And when they journey this road, you offer them respite from physical persecution on that road. When you offer them your house, you offer them rest from the weariness of spiritual warfare. You offer them rest from the simple strains of traveling ministry. You see, in that day, there weren't a lot of inns. They just didn't exist. They weren't in that area, and they weren't a part of that time, that era. There weren't a lot. We know this pretty well because of the story of Jesus and the Advent, that both Joseph and Mary tried to find room at an inn, vacancy, so they could bring the Savior of the world into the world, but there was no vacancy. And when you understand what an inn looked like in that day, you're probably going to feel relieved about that because it's not some boutique bed and breakfast like we have a picture of today. It's not even your run-of-the-mill Motel 6. That's not what they had. In their day, they were few and far between. They were run by really crooked individuals who only sought to get ahead financially, oftentimes robbing the people who would try to stay there because these were no better than rodent-infested brothels. So an inn in that day, when you think about the Christmas story and the scandalous nature of the entire thing, there was no vacancy in the inn for Jesus to be brought into the world, but I actually kind of like that he was brought in by a manger rather than a brothel. Hello? We'll start looking at that next week. He says, John is trying to say something that's really important, and he says that the gospel transforms everything. It changes everything, but it is the key to true transformation. Apart from God's love, encountering you and being embraced by you, no one truly changes. We can propose a false sense of love. We can propose a false sense of peace. We can mimic that. We can lie. But the only person who truly transforms, truly changes, is one who is accepted, repented, and been changed by the gospel. Because the gospel changes us. It changed John, it changed Gaius, and now Gaius is supporting those who've been traveling by generously sharing with them his house. Folks who have experienced that very same change, and they carry with them, to those who haven't, the hope that they might change. Hear of Jesus, turn and repent, and accept a love that's unconditional, that exceeds the limits of this place. In that day, the safest place for anyone to stay was someone else's house. You need to understand this. That's why he's highlighting hospitality. But specifically, the safest place for a Christian to stay in that day was another Christian's house because there weren't many of them. This is still all new. And so for their own safety, for their own respite, for their own camaraderie, for their own time to be renewed in their spirit, praying with, being fed, being cared for by other believers, so they could carry forth that gospel in really difficult times. He says, Gaius, I commend you. You're more about transformational relationship than you are transactional ones. How many of you have experienced transactional relationships in this life? It's a relationship where you either get or you get taken from. That's it. You either get and you take, or you get taken from. There is nothing more to it. Why? Because it's how people relate to one another in a selfish environment. In a broken world, that's how people relate. So how many of you, because you've experienced transactional relationship, were taught to be a little bit skeptical and say things like, nothing in this life is free? Yeah. I mean, you are all a part of a broken world, right? Absolutely. So we've all experienced transactional relationships. He's going, Gaius, you're more about transformational relationship than you are transactional one. Your life was changed by Jesus, and so therefore you're willing to get in there and not sidestep the problem. You're willing to get in there and see other people's lives transformed because you have hope. Now here's the thing. He goes on in this passage to rebuke a brother. Well, it's hard to even call him a brother. Diotrephes is in this church, and he has been given a role of influence, but he's not hospitable. He's the exact opposite. He's spreading lies, he's spreading gossip, and ultimately he seeks his own needs first. And here's what John says. I'm coming to you and I'm going to pick a fight with this dude. I'm coming to you and I'm picking that fight. There's a conflict in this existence that needs to be resolved. And I'm going to resolve it. I'm willing to have the conflict. I'm willing to get in there. I'm not willing to just sidestep it. So he says it in 3 John chapter 1, verses 9 to 11. He says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he's doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil. Gaius, keep doing what you're doing. Don't do what Diotrephes is doing, but do what is good. So John draws this clear distinction between Gaius and Diotrephes. And he highlights Gaius as proper and appropriate. And he understands and knows Diotrephes really well. Why? Because he once was a son of thunder. He knows what it's like to walk in the old life. He knows what it's like to be out for yourself only. And he is using these two men as an example of a life that's been transformed and one that's just faking it. Hello? He goes, you're to be about what Gaius is doing, church. I'm going to commend him. But I'm never going to buy into this. I'm not going to be about this. So you want to know what to do and what not to do? Here, he says this. Here's what you should do. Be generous to those who share the gospel, those who promote transformational life. Be hospitable. Be a part of the kingdom's advance. Show your love for others with hospitality. But he says, but if you want to know what not to do, let me read for you again the list of what he has done and what he highlights about Diotrephes' life. Listen to it. Think on it. He says, do not do this. Do not avoid seeking self. Do not be about seeking yourself. Avoid it. Avoid seeking self. Avoid being dismissive. Listen closely. Avoid being malicious. Avoid lying about that. And avoid discouraging others from also being hospitable and trained up in the way of the Lord. Let me try to paint this for you. How many of you have extended family? That's every hand. Okay? How many of you also recognize that extended family can be dysfunctional? How many of you have a cousin Eddie? If you didn't raise your hand, guess who? You are. Okay? There's always someone within our families who are willing to pull the pin and throw it, right? And it's just a bomb that goes off. There is conflict present, okay? I need to remind you of the words of Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 5, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. He doesn't say blessed are the peacekeepers. There's a clear distinction and difference. And many of us, let me just welcome you in. How many of you coming to this time of year, you're headed to Thanksgiving, you're looking into Christmas and the potential of maybe being with other people and extended family who are just dysfunctional? How many of you have ever had Cousin Eddie pull the pin, throw it, and everyone goes, what just happened? And inside, you say to someone else, or they say to you, look, let's not say anything. Let's just get past it. Let's just act like it didn't happen. Let's just deal with it. We'll kind of navigate the awkward and we'll move on. We'll just get through it. Let me ask you a question. Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it more abundant. Do you think let's just get through it is the definition of abundant life? Do you think that Jesus wants you to just sidestep it? Just act like it didn't happen to keep the peace? Do you think Jesus wants you to train your kids to do that? If you're to raise them up in the way they should go, do you think that because you were taught just to sidestep it and not worry about what Cousin Eddie says? I mean, he always does that. We're just going to act like it didn't happen. Do you think he wants you to teach your kids to do that and just keep the peace? Or do you think he meant what he said when he said in the most profound sermon he ever said, blessed are the peacemakers who get in there, see that conflict, call it out, are willing to resolve that conflict because they alone are called children of God. Hello? Hey, there's a fight worth having, he's saying, and I'm going to have it. There's a fight worth picking, and I'm going to do it because you've held up Diotrephes, even given him influence within your church, even allowed him to be known as a leader, and that guy doesn't even know Jesus. Hello? There's no way he knows Jesus. His life would be transformed. He would look differently. Gaius is your example. Follow him. Turn your back on this and pray and hope that his life might change so that he would be willing to stop sidestepping it and make some peace. That he would see the conflict, be willing to resolve it instead of just acting like it didn't happen. If your life has been changed, then that transformation should drive your generosity and your willingness to be about transformational relationships around you. Just like it drove John, just like it drove Paul, just like it drove Gaius. John's commending those who are willing to step in. Get in there, get their hands dirty, not just run away from it. Hello? How many of you, this is class. Let's just have an honest conversation. Sitting down at the dinner table. It's way easier to just act like nothing happened. This means yes. How many of you have been a part of that, seen it? How many of you walked away with a feeling inside, this is jacked up? You still have that feeling. This is not right. This is messed up. But we're just going to keep the peace. Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peacekeepers. He said, those who have been transformed, those who will love, and those who have been changed by my love are going to be willing to get in there, get their hands dirty. In fact, he gave us an example in Luke 10. Here's the example involving an inn, by the way. I love it. He says in Luke 10:25, he says, on the occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus, said, teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Verse 26, what is written in the law? Jesus replied, how do you read it? Verse 27, he said, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. So do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And then Jesus, in reply, gives a parable. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers because he was traveling on the road during our day. You guys all understand the context now. They stripped him of his clothes. They beat him. They went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so too, a Levite, when he came to that place and saw him, passed by on the other side, which the Levite is a priest at another level. And then a Samaritan. As he traveled, he came where the man was. He saw him, took pity upon him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his donkey, brought him to an inn to take care of him. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, said, look after him, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for the extra expense you may have incurred. Verse 36. Jesus turns, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell amongst the hands of robbers? The expert in the law says, the one who had mercy on him. Cannot even bring himself to say, Samaritan. There's a reason. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Jesus said, go and be like the Samaritan. Go and be like the one that you hate. Go be like the one who to you, and you've taught in your religious system forever, is worse than the Gentiles because they're half Jewish. Be like them. Your sworn enemy. Be like them. Do not be like the priest, the one who's asking this question as everyone is standing around trying to entrap him. Do not be like the priest who is supposed to be an intercessor between God and man, who sidesteps the issue. More concerned about what they might contract, a disease, the blood spilled out, or the thought that this person actually deserved the beating and the death they're getting. Not someone who just sidesteps the issue to keep the peace for his own self-preservation, but someone who's willing to get in there and make peace and care for someone with compassion like the Samaritan. And so the priest who asked this question of Jesus, maybe even a Levite priest who was in line to be the high priest of all Jerusalem, sacrificing annually for the sins of the people. This is huge. He goes, maybe you missed it. Maybe you're Diotrephes. Maybe it's the Samaritan who you've taught everyone else to hate, but I came for. Maybe that Samaritan is the very reason I stepped out of heaven to fix what you never could. Maybe that Samaritan was the one who couldn't save themselves, so I came and spent my time amongst them, amongst you. And see, for me, a couple of natural questions arise, like several. Here it is. Now, priests and Levites, let me be clear, all had disciples. They all had their own disciples. And what that meant, just like Jesus, they had to leave their home and follow their priest. They had to leave their home and follow their rabbi. And they were going to one day take their rabbi's position. They had been through 3 levels of education, and if they could get to the point where they could be chosen as a disciple of a rabbi, the most educated amongst all of Judaism, then they would leave their home to take on the role, literally apprentice under the rabbi to take his job one day. What would the priests and Levi say if one of their disciples saw their rabbi pass by a man who had been left for dead on the road? What would they say? What would they say? What would their explanation be? The act is already dismissive and self-seeking. The very things that John has said to us to avoid here. But would their response be slick? Would their response be something just like in this interaction with Jesus? He sought to justify himself. Would it be justifying? Would it be a lie? Would they go, well, obviously that guy had it coming, so we're not going to interact. We don't know what took place, and so we're not going to get involved. We could get leprosy if we touch him. We're not going to do that. Maybe that disciple is walking alongside to turn back, and they see the Samaritan stop and care for the man. He goes, wait a second, Rabbi, I left everything to follow you, to be one who intercedes between God and man. We are supposed to hate Samaritans. They're supposed to be the hated by God, our sworn enemy. Why did the Samaritan stop and you didn't? That was a Jew who was left for dead on the road, our own brother. Why did our sworn enemy take care of him and you, his leader, didn't? How many of you think that leader might turn and maliciously slander the Samaritan? Well, obviously, that's a Samaritan. And I won't have no dealings with Samaritans. I'm too holy. I'm too righteous. Dismissing the beaten man, more concerned about the way it looks for him than it is caring for the needs of the person. And listen, did you see the sin just pass? If he passes to his own disciple, who is one day going to care for the others, interceding between God and man, caring for all of Judaism. If he passes lies, malicious slander, he just discipled his one who's left everything to follow him. In peacekeeping versus peacemaking, in generational sin continues. For those of us who have kids who are headed to Thanksgiving and Christmas with Cousin Eddie, stop trying to keep the peace. Stop training them wrong. Teach them to love. Teach them, I love Eddie enough to get in there, to care for him, to recognize there's a hurt that must be evident in Eddie because he keeps doing this. And I want to be with Eddie. I want to get in there and I want to see this conflict to its end. I want to resolve it so that Eddie will stop pulling the pin and throwing a grenade every time we're here because he needs attention so bad. Hello? I want to stop this. So, next question, why did Jesus pick a Samaritan in this example? For me, I think it's pretty clear. Jesus chose a Samaritan who cared and tended for this man more than he cared for himself and his own reputation. He was hospitable and paid for this man's stay. Why would he give his money, a good sum of money, by the way, in that day, to a crooked innkeeper who was likely to just leverage that money for his own wealth? Why would he do all that? Why didn't he use more wisdom? Why was he so stupid? Why would he be taken advantage of by being kind? Because he'd been transformed. Because his life had changed. Because John says, look, Jesus took me from a son of thunder to an apostle of love. And the boldness by which I used to defend myself and my actions, justifying myself, maliciously slandering others, that same vicious fight is now within me, and it hasn't changed, but my heart and mind have. And I'm willing to fight for what is right. I'm willing to have that fight and see it to the end. And you know what, people, I get asked this question a lot, and I want to be clear about it. People ask me, what does it take to be a leader? Can I be clear with you? Every leader in this room should agree with this statement, and here it is. Leadership is nothing more than conflict resolution. Hello? That's all it is. Leaders, all they do is resolve conflict. And so you're ready to consider being a leader when you're ready to fight the good fight and willing to resolve conflict, willing to make peace rather than sidestep it and just keep the peace. You're ready to be put out in front of others when you can resolve conflict and be willing to be hospitable and be willing to be generous because you trust him more than you trust what man can do to you. You trust your helper, like Gaius did, like John did, more so than you do hold up the images and examples of people who justify themselves, they lie about it, Diotrephes. He goes, do not allow yourself to be this church, be this one. And here's the last question. I think it's natural. Why does Jesus in Luke 10 not give a clear description and give no discrimination to who our neighbor is? Why does he not go, well, obviously Jewish brothers or only Christians? Why does he not discriminate? Why does he not do that? Why does he not say only white Christians? Why does he not discriminate? Only those who believe like you and follow Jesus. Same skin color, same dialect. He doesn't. He says, who is your neighbor? Everyone. Who loved him like a neighbor? The Samaritan, the least of us. Go and be like him. What's amazing about the story is the faith and compassion of the Samaritan, because he was more concerned about the fallen and the needy than he was his own reputation. He was more concerned about the nearly dead and the afflicted, the abused, than he was himself. And you know why? Because he cared for someone like he would hope that someone would care for him if he too were on journey and had been jumped and robbed and left for dead. That sounds familiar. The first commandment was love God with all that you have. The second and greatest commandment, Jesus said, is equal to the first, is what? Love others what? As you love yourself. He changed that commandment in John 13. He said, actually, love others like I would. Go to those who cannot help themselves. Love them compassionately. So he shared with this man, and didn't think about it, didn't give it a second thought, because he was compelled by the love that had changed his life to offer hope out of that very same love that this person might have their life changed. That's why. He didn't do it so that he could post about it. He didn't do it so others would notice. He didn't do it so that Instagram could be put on notice. He did it because his life had been changed, and he had a hope that other lives could be changed. So, church, this morning, what would we do? As the band is coming back, I'm going to ask you to just kind of close your eyes for a moment, and I want to just think about what Jesus said. In this example in Luke 10, in this highlighting of John of Gaius' example, Jesus says, look at this example and do likewise. Apostle John commends those like Gaius who do so, and he rebukes those like Diotrephes who don't. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to let us all off the hook for just a second, then we got to wrestle with Jesus here. The beauty and the grace of Jesus is that we have all likely done both at some point in our lives. We all mentioned we have a cousin Eddie. We have all probably helped in a really selfless way in a moment, but we've also probably walked on by, sidestepping the problem in another. We've probably gotten in there just like the Samaritan, cared for it the way that Jesus would in some moments. But if we're honest, we've probably also dismissed opportunities, just like the priest did, just like Diotrephes. And Jesus says, I want you to notice the example that I'm giving to the leaders, to my church. I want to give you the example of the Samaritan. I want you to do likewise. You may not always get it right, but just like I told Cain, hey, if you know what to do, won't you always be accepted? So here's what I want you to do. Just like I told Cain, think on what I've said in my word. Think on how you haven't practiced it before. Learn from your mistakes. This time, go and do better next time. Get in there. Don't be willing just to keep the peace. Love them because you've been transformed by the true love of God to make peace and be known as my children. This morning, Father, we come to you as a people who are desperately in need of grace, desperately in need of Jesus' love, and grateful for both. And there are people in our lives, related, not so, that need that very love and need that very grace. And they're looking for it from people who know it, who've been transformed by it. So, Father, today, would you move on our heart? Would you make us aware of the places where we're not living as if we've been transformed, where maybe we've just been sidestepping issues and keeping peace versus making peace, where we're not quite as hospitable and generous as we need to be? God, will you teach us to love like Jesus loved us? And will you help us to remember the examples that we looked at in Scripture today? And may we, your church, just simply be what you commend, something that's accurate, a representation that pleases you, not one that offends you. We're no longer in old life. God, today I pray you help us to walk in our new life in Jesus. And whatever we need to do this morning to be woke to that reality, I pray you do it right now in this room. In Jesus' name, amen.